Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the line. This is Andy Yost with the Center for Courts. We are here today for our CIP all-call. As you can tell from the Adobe Connect chat room and the slide deck we have queued up here, today's topic is CQI Workshops. If you are on the phone and you don't have your phone muted, please do so. That way we can just kind of reduce some of the background noise. And of course, as always, we'll have our open space Q&A later on in the workshop, so you'll get a chance to ask some questions. We have today what we think is going to be an exciting presentation for you on the CQI Workshops. I'm sorry, somebody has a phone that's beeping 3 times, so if folks could just double check and make sure they're muted, that'd be great. We have on the line Dr. Alicia Summers from the Center for Court. We have Scott Trowbridge and myself facilitating, and we're going to showcase a couple of the projects that we worked on at the CQI workshop that happened late last year as well. So, as always, we'll do a real quick tutorial here on Adobe Connect. If this is becoming old hat for you, that's good, and I apologize for the redundancy. So just bear with me for 1 second. Again, the intent today is to demonstrate the value of the Capacity Building Center for Courts CQI Workshops. In front of you, you see a slide deck, and we'll move that slide deck along as we go throughout the call here today. Lower left-hand corner, you see an agenda. The numbers that are bracketed are that's the amount of time that we're going to spend on each one of those items, and then, of course, the call-in information. In the middle of your screen, you have the chat box. Keep in mind that everything that you type into the chat box will be preserved, which is good for us because we can save that information and use it for future reference. But it also means don't type any nasty grams back and forth to each other because it will exist in perpetuity. Bottom right-hand corner of your screen is a files share box, so you should be able to click on any of those files and hit download file. We'll reference some of those materials throughout the day. You don't have to have them downloaded in front of you to follow along, but at some point throughout the all-call, you should download that information if you don't already have those documents. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, you see a list of attendees, which are all of you, plus the 3 of us who are hosting. So, welcome to everyone, and let's do a real quick gradient of agreement just to make sure that we all are tuned in and have a pulse and that the chat box is working. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is what homework, and I'm sorry, where 1 is what homework, and 5 is I uploaded more than 5 documents on the CIP share, so please give me 100 stickers. How much do you agree with this statement? I did my January all-call homework and uploaded at least 1 document to CIP share. So if you just type into the chat box where 1 is uh-oh, homework, and 5 is oh yeah, I got all kinds of material on there. And if for some reason you have no idea what I'm talking about, or if you did not upload something, will you just respond to this poll? It's kind of a lighthearted poll. I'd like to just get a sense of where people are with the CIP share in this first go-around. It was not our expectation that we'd have 100% response. That's just sort of how it goes when you're introducing some new technology. But it would be helpful from our perspective if we could get some CQI data to try to help you all work through the CIP share process. So just take 1 second here, or actually I have 2 minutes left in my introduction. So we'll take 30 seconds here to respond to this poll and give us some feedback as to why, if you didn't upload anything on the CIP share, that was the case. Good. As the data's coming in, it's nice to know that only a few of us had technical nightmares. Of course, from our end, that's one of the things that you have a concern about, is that the technology cannot be empowering, but instead is an obstacle. So it's nice to know that that wasn't a huge issue. For those of you that are entering that you tried to log in, but it was a technical nightmare, if you haven't already reached out to me or Scott or the Center for Courts or your liaison, please do so. We'll help you work through that. Take just a few more seconds here to respond to the poll. Great. And Edie, I see your comment in the chat box. You and I can work on that together. Thanks for typing that in. Great. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just get this poll out of here. That's super helpful for us. Thanks for that. I think I am anyway. Let's see if I can. Yeah, there we go. Get that out of there. All right. So now what I'd like to do is hand the microphone over to Dr. Summers, who's going to speak with you a bit today about the CQI workshop program that the Center for Courts has developed. So Dr. Summers, are you there?
Yes.
Excellent. The microphone is all yours.
Hi, everyone. It's Alicia Summers. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about, as Andy said, the CQI workshop overview. So we're actually really excited to talk about this new model of service delivery that we have at the Capacity Building Center for Courts. We were we always make efforts to try to be responsive to your needs and the things that you've identified to us that you'd like to see more of. So we've been trying to find a way to have service delivery, knowing that we can't come out to every site and do the same level of work everywhere across the country. We're trying to find ways to figure out, well, what's the most efficient way for us to help multiple sites at one time. And we came up with our CQI consults, which I think most of you are familiar with at this point, and we asked on your self-assessments if you're interested. And the consults are really bringing together a content expert or a CQI expert or whatever you need to talk through a project and help move you in the direction of the next step, whatever that looks like, whether it looks like helping you look at data, evaluating tools, or just having a discussion about where you are in the process and what you need to move to the next step. Well, our workshop is really an effort to expand on that process and then also to bring groups together to do some in-person hands-on work. So we've heard from you before that you really like the peer-to-peer learning activities. You like having the opportunity to learn from each other and to find out what others in the country are doing or what other states are doing around the same area. We also heard that you'd like to do more hands-on stuff, that people prefer the in-person over the telephone, which we totally get. And we also learned from last year in discussions, both in the self-assessment and other surveys of the CIP, that you're really interested in the quality legal representation work. In particular, that was identified as one of the biggest priority areas and areas that people were starting the work but not really sure where to go next with. So we took all that together and came up with this new model that we call a CQI workshop. And we call it that just because we're really focusing on the CQI process, trying to identify the steps in the process and where we want to go next, but also because we want to do work. It's an opportunity to do hands-on work, get into the weeds on whatever the issues are, and help move the work forward. We came up with this idea for a workshop, and we actually piloted it already. We had our first workshop in November, and it was regional. And so we asked states in regions 8, 9, and 10 who were already expressed an interest or had said that they were doing work around quality legal representation if they wanted to attend. I invited them out and told them what the purpose would be, and we brought 9 states together to do this work. And at the first one, it was very targeted to people who were early in the process. And what we really wanted was to try to get everyone at a similar or the same place so that we could do small group work and it would be meaningful and make sense in some way to do that. So we ask everybody who is early in the process, and that means you haven't implemented a big change or you haven't evaluated that yet, but you're still looking at what do I want to do and what do I want to know. We brought them all out to Denver to talk through this work in a meaningful way. And since then, we've made a couple changes to our model, but the gist of it is what we wanted to do is help increase the understanding of where a project is in the CQI process. So we wanted all the CIPs who came to tell us where you are in the process, and we listed out 12 steps. And the 12 steps are really just an in-depth in-the-weeds look at where you are in the CQI process, broken down into steps that we might be able to provide some assistance around. For example, when you did your self-assessment, you'll notice there were 5 different phases that we talked about for the work. You know, identifying your needs and developing a theory of change and developing and selecting an intervention. We took those and they're broken down into even more detailed steps. And that helps us see where you are, but also where you need to go in the process. So our goal for the CQI workshop is really to help increase your understanding of where a project is in the process, help build your capacity to move forward in the work, whatever that looks like, and then increase your understanding and ability to articulate a concrete and measurable theory of change. So at our pilot workshop that we did, we spent a lot of time talking about tools. We talked about data indicators for the quality legal representation as a group. We brainstormed what would that look like, what does quality representation look like, how you would measure it. We sat down one-on-one with each of the states and helped them articulate a theory of change, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about theory of change here in just a few minutes. But we helped them think through what that means. So what do you think is going to happen if you have higher quality legal representation? How do you define higher quality legal representation? How's that going to improve immediate behavior in the courtroom or outside the courtroom? How's that going to affect short-term goals or long-term goals as part of this project? So we really sat down and drilled down into specifically per state what that was going to look like. Then we got together in the afternoon and built some tools around that. So you really want to focus on quality legal representation for parents. What do you want to know? Well, I want to know if the parents feel like their attorney advocated for them. I want to know if the attorney meets with the parents outside of court and how often. I want to know if the parents feel like they have a voice through their attorney. Well, those are all things that you can develop in a parent survey or a client survey. So we broke people out into groups based on what they wanted to do and had them talk through these and start developing tools. And that's kind of the model that our first workshop took. Since then, we've refined this process, and this is what the model is going to look like going forward. And I should say, our CQI workshop, it was well received. We had really good feedback on the pilot in terms of usefulness. People seem to think it was a good use of their time. So this is something that we plan to do at least a couple times a year. We're thinking 2 to 3 times a year, small groups bringing together around a specific topic. So our goal is to use a flipped classroom model. And what that means is you're going to have some homework before you come in. Instead of learning all the stuff you need to in the classroom and then going home and doing homework, we're going to give you a little bit of homework to do ahead of time so that when you come to the workshop, you're completely prepared to jump right into the actual work so that we can work best with you to move the project forward. If you come in and we're teaching you all the different steps or teaching you more about the theory of change, we find that helpful, but we can't get into the weeds as much around your project. So we ask for some pre-work ahead of time, and that's what we mean by a flipped classroom model. When we're there, we're actually working on your project and what you need. We are going to have one model of this workshop, so essentially they're all going to have these objectives to some degree, and that we're going to do similar activities no matter what the workshop is on. But our plan is to have rotating topics based on your expressed needs. So we started the first one on quality legal representation because that had been expressed to us. We really need some help around quality legal representation. That's what we heard. So we decided to do the first one, and actually the second one is also going to be around the same topic on quality legal representation. But we plan to let you decide from the field what you need, what you want to know, and we'll design the workshops around whatever topic area you have. We bring in CQI experts, people on the research and evaluation team, and other content experts and staff all work together to help you get what you need. So we all come in together in one place to do this hands-on work. We do one-on work with the sites, particularly around developing this theory of change. Your theory of change is one of the most critical parts in the process, and we think it's important to have that concrete and measurable and fully articulated in order for you to move forward with the work. And that's because the theory of change is going to help you identify, one, what activity you think you need to work on, and what that's going to look like. So if you say, quality legal representation is going to lead to better outcomes. Well, that's likely true, and we believe that, but how do we measure that? We can't unless we break it down into concrete components. And we can't until we define what that means. What does it mean to say quality legal representation? What does that look like to you? We can't do that until we get to the theory of change. So we plan on doing a lot of work around theory of change to help articulate that. And from that, you'll see how much easier it is to start thinking about how you want to measure this going forward. After you figured out that this is what I think is going to happen based on my theory of change, you're more likely to understand what you need to measure that and what you need to move the work forward. So we're going to do a lot of work around that. We're going to help develop usable data collection instruments. That was one of the focuses in the pilot. We wanted to make sure that we were able to talk as a group about what was needed, and we split up and worked on surveys for the stakeholders, surveys for the attorneys themselves. How do you survey them to see if they even understand what best practices are, what practices they're supposed to be doing, versus what they're able to do on a day-to-day basis. So asking the attorneys questions, asking other stakeholders questions about quality legal representation. We had client surveys where you're talking to youth or parents to get their perception. We also talked a little bit about just identifying the indicators that are needed to say this is quality representation, and then what a case file review or court observation might look like based on your unique needs. So part of the goals of the workshop is to develop usable instruments that you can take back with you when you leave. And then our ultimate goal is to really fold this into your work plan for what you'd like to do after the workshop. So our goal is to build you a work plan so that you have concrete next steps, concrete goals to meet to move this work forward, and that we have a plan for follow-up when you leave the workshop, including what you want to do. So just a little bit about what the process is for these workshops. What we did in the past, and we'll continue to do as we move forward. We did a pre-workshop survey. So we give you a survey link if you're interested in attending one of these workshops, and you go through and complete it based on your project that you're interested in. So if we're doing a workshop on quality legal representation and you think this is a good fit for something that you would like to do, and I think that that's important to recognize if the workshop is not on a topic you're interested in, there will likely be one in the future in your interest area. And if not, there's always the potential to do consults or something one-on-one. But I would definitely focus on whatever you want to prioritize for your state, because we only are doing a couple of these a year, and we're trying to prioritize the ones that have the most interest. So we send you a pre-workshop survey. The workshop survey asks you several questions. We want you to describe the work that you're doing, so we have a kind of a sense of what it is. We want you to identify where you are in the process, and we spell out the different stages in the process and ask you to pick one, and sometimes more than one, because we recognize you might be in multiple steps at once. We ask you a couple questions about your barriers to moving the work forward, what you'd like to get out of the workshop, and then how you're focusing your efforts around quality legal representation. Is it around child representation, parent representation, or agency representation? Maybe you want to focus on all three. Are you implementing a pilot project just in one jurisdiction, or are you hoping to do statewide efforts? It's really just to get a better sense of what you're doing in your state around this. Then we ask you to identify the persons that you think would be best suited to come to this workshop. Now, typically what we've done in the past is we've asked that people bring 2 persons. So 2 people come from each state. We keep the workshop small so that we can do the one-on-one work and so that we can have small group discussion without it being too hard to facilitate. So we had 9 states last time. So we ask you to think about who is the best person to do this. And from our last one, we did learn that sometimes people come to the workshop with certain expectations, and those might not be the best people to do the work. We really need the people who are making the decisions about the work or in the weeds doing the work who can benefit best from this. So part of our process is you fill out the pre-workshop survey in a certain time frame, and then we have a follow-up discussion. Your liaison contacts you and walks through some of the questions to get a little bit more information and has a really candid conversation with you about whether this is a good fit for you and who the right people are. That's an opportunity for us to make sure it's not a waste of your time. Our goal really is to give you something meaningful and useful, so we don't want you to come with an expectation of one thing and get something else. So there's a follow-up conversation with your liaison, and then we might give you some pre-work. For example, what we might say is we'd like you to come with a theory of change, and maybe you're not there yet in the process, but we'd like you to start thinking about it. We can do more work on site, but we'd like you to come with something in hand. The pre-work might be, here's something interesting we think you should read that'll help you better understand this process. It might be, here's some tools that have been developed in the past. I know you're interested in these tools, but the pre-work is really meant to meet you where you are in the process and give you a sense of what you'll need to start to do to move the work forward. Then we have the workshop. The workshop is one day, on-site, hands-on. We do one-on-one and small group work. And it's one day, typically from 9 to 4. It's a full day of work. And I can tell you last time, it's a lot of effort on the part of the CIPs and the staff to come in and meet and talk about this all day. But we make every effort to make it energetic. And I know last time someone said we should have cookies. So there might be cookies at the next one. But we're making efforts to try to make it as interactive as possible while still giving you the one-on-one attention that we know that you want. After the workshop or during the workshop, we'll be developing a work plan for the next steps. The work plan is going to lay out action steps of what you need to do to move the work forward, and it'll have responsibilities and other pieces that you might need. For example, your work plan might mean you have figured out your theory of change, and you really want to develop a tool that assesses parent engagement and satisfaction with attorneys. And we've started that process in the workshop. Your next steps might be to bring together a team to develop this tool. It might be to have a consult with us, a follow-up conversation on the phone where we talk through some options for tools. It might be that you want to develop a tool and vet it through your liaison or some of the CQI experts at the CVCC, but that the work plan will come up with the steps that you need to move the work forward with some concrete deadlines and what our role is in helping you move the work forward. And we want to be able to give you that plan at the end of the workshop. Following the workshop, we do staged follow-up with you. So we do a follow-up based on, here's the notes from the workshop and what we learned from everyone. If we developed any tools at the workshop, they get shared broadly. We also share the notes that we have from discussions that occurred at the workshop. So everyone has the same information, whether or not they participated in every group that was possible. We share all that with you, and then we do continued follow-up through your liaison to check in, see how things are going, and help you work the work plan. So that's typically our model. The follow-up, like I said, could look like anything that you need to move it forward. Tool development, data. We can help you look at data and see what kind of analyses need to be done, help you figure out what's useful for you in terms of the data, because it's not always, everything's not going to be super useful for you on every project. So we can help you work through that process. The other thing that we do as part of it, and I said I'd talk a little bit about theory of change, we really focus heavily on helping you develop a theory of change. And I'm going to try to hammer this point home because it is so critical. I've seen a lot of theories of change, and they're very hard to measure and come up with something very concrete, and they often get insanely complex as part of this process because a theory of change is really a summary of a bunch of hypotheses for a project that explains the whys and how a change is going to occur. And so you have to really drill down into something very specific. You have to define what you mean by quality representation. Is there a specific indicator? You have to spell out what you mean by that. Does that mean they're communicative with their clients? Does that mean they advocate for their clients in court? And if so, what does that look like? Does that mean that they communicate well with social services? You have to think through every single point and what that looks like. And then you need to think about what the short-term and long-term outcomes of that are.
Okay.
Sorry, Siri decided to help me out with theory of change there. But you have to decide what each of these pieces look like. You have to develop the plan. We think this indicator is going to change things immediately. How? And how's that going to end up with the short-term outcomes, and how's that going to go to the long-term outcomes? So we do a lot of work around this theory of change and helping you to really articulate what your project's going to do and what outcomes it's ultimately going to achieve. And this is going to be really critical in helping you link your project to long-term outcomes, which I know is something that's been expressed before. So what I'd like to do now is just give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about one of the states that came to the first workshop and have her tell you about her experience, her project, and what she took home from the workshop. And so Deborah Alsaker-Burke is going to talk a little bit about the work from Idaho. They came to the workshop in November, and she's going to give you a sense of what that was like from a CIP perspective.
Hi, Dr. Summers. Thank you. Idaho was able to participate in the December CQI workshop, and we found it immensely helpful. The team that went was me and the manager of our planning and research department, and I found it really helpful to have her there. I think she was a little bit more familiar with the model, and for that reason, I think our thinking was a little more crisp, and we were able to move through the model a little bit more quickly, and I just felt like it was a great team to have she and I go there. What I found really effective, that I found useful, was there was large group discussion, but there was plenty of time for us to individually, with one of the liaisons, work through our plan. We went looking to develop a project plan for improving legal representation in Idaho. The 4 questions that we were asked were, in phase 1, how do you know this is an issue in your jurisdiction? And in our particular case, we had 2 surveys from lawyers, and we had direction from our CIP steering committee. Who are the stakeholders that should contribute to this discussion? We walked through and identified who that would be. We explored the data that we had available to us and that we might be able to use in the project. And then the phase 2 was develop a theory of change. So I'm not always sure that what's helpful or useful in one state applies across the board. So rather than walk through our complete plan, I can tell you that our long-term outcomes were fewer children coming into care. So we have data about our shelter care, and we could measure the number of children coming into care after we implement our plan. More timely permanency and more timely reunification, specifically focusing on more timely reunification. And what I found helpful was that because we had our research manager there, she and I were able to really think through what we have available to us now to get baseline data, as well as what we're changing into a different case management system and what we would be able to pull out of our new case management system. So we were able to really spend a good amount of time thinking through whether we could actually measure what we were planning to implement. The workshop had I think, even more significant impact on how we are going to do business in Idaho. A couple months after that, we went to our state applied for and was accepted at a Georgetown multidisciplinary program on crossover youth. We had 7 people on the team. We had Department of Health and Welfare, Children's Mental Health, the Department of Juvenile Corrections, the court, and it was balanced between both child welfare and juvenile corrections. And like happens, I think, many times when we're, at least to us, when we're planning projects, we got to the Georgetown project and we started thinking about what we wanted to do for our project that's associated with this program. And we started out, I think, very well. We talked about what information we had, what information we were missing, and we took some tentative steps toward developing a theory of change. But we got a little bit sidetracked in that we didn't fully complete the theory of change conversation, and what we ended up doing was looking at what information we currently had, and then in a practical sense, how much time we had available, what resources we had, and so we decided to do a case file review. And the Department of Health and Welfare could provide us with 2 different groups of kids who were in both systems. In one case, it was youth who'd gone from the Department of Health and Welfare to our juvenile corrections, and the other group was the opposite of that. So without a lot of more conversation about what we were going to do, we just decided, yep, that's what we're going to do. We have this information. We're going to do a case file review. We're going to see where it leads us, and then we'll decide where we're going to go from there. And it really didn't take very long before we started to run into problems. The 23 cases for everyone else would have been 209 cases for the court system, because each of those youth, those 23 youth, had 9, and on average 9 cases associated, either CP or or juvenile justice. So starting to run into problems, I went to our research manager and asked her if she would be willing, if I brought the team back together, whether she would walk us through this theory of change that we learned at the Denver CQI workshop. So she did, and we had that meeting last Friday. We brought everyone back together, and we just stepped our way through the questions. And we were really able to see that we were coming to the table with different assumptions about what the problem was, different assumptions about, we were making assumptions before we even started about what the solution should be. We hadn't really picked the best method for getting the information we wanted. What we really wanted was to tell the story of these youth, which is a completely different project than a statistically significant sample of cases that we could generalize across the whole population. So after the end of this meeting, we're going to have one more follow-up meeting. We really were able to be much more clear about what our long and short-term outcomes were, what assumptions we were making in terms of the process and the solution, what we want to measure at the conclusion of this. And I think everyone left that meeting feeling much, much better about our project. It's actually going to be a much smaller project. We are going to do a deep dive instead of trying to generalize across the population. We're much more focused on the details. We're going to add focus groups. So for us, we found the workshop to be helpful not only in looking at the issue that we went to discuss, which was improving legal representation, but just also in starting to really use it as a format for project planning. So that's all I would like to share. Anybody have any questions? Hello?
Yeah, we hear you. Thanks. So if you have questions, we actually have a couple more minutes in this session, so feel free to either use the raise hand icon or you can type the question into the chat box. If you raise your hand, please remember to unmute yourself if you're going to ask a question over the phone. Thanks. So we'll give it a couple minutes here. Looks like there's a couple questions coming in on the chat. So it looks like Scott is asking a question. Thank you, Scott. First of all, I'll just read it out loud, and then maybe you can take a crack at it. So he says, in Idaho, which interventions are being measured to advance the theory of change that those interventions would lead to the desired outcomes of children coming into care after implementing the plan, more timely permanence, and specifically, I'm wondering if there's and specifically more timely reunification?
What we're focusing on is training. Our theory of change is that some really targeted, focused training will lead to a better understanding of the process and the law, and ultimately result in better advocacy for clients. So we're going to be measuring hearing quality and parent engagement, probably with some kind of exit survey. I'm thinking on that one, and focusing on what our permanency outcomes look like. So the interventions are going to be training, measuring hearing quality, measuring advocacy, and then measuring parent engagement. Does that answer your question?
This is Andy from the Center for Courts. From my perspective, it sounded like it directly answered it. We'll let Scott speak for himself if he wants to on the chat box. And it looks like maybe Michelle is typing into the chat. I'm not sure. We'll see in just a second.
This is Scott. Maybe just quicker for me to ask this question, which is, measuring the quality of the hearings, the parent engagement, that's designed to lead to some other outcome, right? Those are more, or is the outcome that you're trying to get to determine whether the quality of the hearings will improve from the training of the attorneys?
What we're hoping is that the quality of increased quality in advocacy, increased understanding of the law and the process, and increased parent engagement will result in more kids being sent home at shelter care with protective orders, i.e. fewer kids coming into care, and large category, more timely permanence, but we really want to do some specific focusing on timely reunification. When is reunification occurring, and will improvements in advocacy and hearing quality and parent engagement result in a change in when reunification is occurring?
And how will you isolate other factors besides this training as driving those changes?
We aren't that far into the process. I don't have an answer for that one. I mean, I don't know that we're going to be able to design a project that will be able to establish a causal relationship between the interventions and the outcomes. I mean, I think the amount of effort that we'd have to put in place to rule out all variables except for those, and then we'd also have to stagger the variables so that we're doing just one at a time. We couldn't implement them all at the same time. I don't know if we need that kind of I don't know if the level of our project plan needs to be such that we could publish the results, and I think to establish I don't know that we're going to get to the place where we could say with certainty that one of these three has a cause, or maybe more than one, has a causal relationship to the outcome. I think we're going to be satisfied if we make some efforts and we see some results that lead in that direction.
Great, thanks. We have a couple other questions here. Michelle's asking, which groups are you targeting with your trainings, and have you uploaded, I think you mean, any documents onto the CIP on the CIP share yet?
We are targeting. We're targeting all parent. We're targeting a training that will be available to all attorneys who practice in child protection in Idaho, which is a kind of a child protection 101, and we're hoping to go online. And our court is going to convene a stakeholder group to work in that direction. We're also specifically focusing on parent attorneys. We just partnered with our Defense Commission to put on a specific training for public defenders in child protection, and then also we're participating in a Region 10 Leadership Forum on improving parent representation this fall, and we will take a team of folks who will specifically look at that subset. So we have both a general training approach and then some specific additional work on parent representation.
Great, thanks. And Michelle, I think that answers your follow-up question. If it doesn't, please continue the conversation in the chat box. We're going to move on to the next session, but by all means, we can have two parallel conversations going on, one over the phone and one in the chat box. So I don't want anyone to think that we're shutting down that part of the conversation. But for expediency's sake, we'll at least move on in the all call itself. So now what we'd like to do is sort of broaden or extend the conversation to discuss integration of pre-existing data sets into some of the CQI work that states are doing. So Dr. Summers, again, is going to speak here briefly about extending the studies to include this pre-existing data. So Dr. Summers?
I think it's really hard to talk briefly about data, but I'll do my best. So one of the things that we do with the workshop, we try to identify data. The biggest issue that we hear a lot from the CIPs is, where do you get data? How do I measure this? Some of the same conversation that was just occurring, how do you create these causal links or look at relationships between the two? And a lot of that is centered around these data elements. Where do we get data to answer the questions that we have about practice? And I think that there are multiple opportunities to do this. Now, on one level, clearly there might be times when you have to collect your own data. There are not data sources that are going to answer all the questions that you have. And if you really want to focus on things like parent engagement, the client's perception, do they feel like someone advocated for them, some of those more procedural justice type issues, then yes, you're going to have to design an instrument or take an instrument that's already been designed and collect your own data around parents or youth, whoever you'd like in the system. But there's also opportunities to take your theory of change and see what data elements you already have available. And I think when you start looking at the data, there's a couple places that you can look for already available data. One, you can always look at what do you track in your own case management system. If the court has a case management system that you can access, that you can pull information from in an easy way, that you can query for what you want to know, definitely check out your case management system and see how it's related to these data indicators that you've identified in your theory of change. You can also start talking to the agency about what data they have available. One of the things that we know from the field is the agencies all report to the Adoption and Foster Care Reporting and Analysis and Reporting System. So they all report to AFCARS. The data. Now, it's not required. Not all the elements are required, but all the states report, to my knowledge, to AFCARS. So there is data that's available to you via AFCARS if you have a memorandum of understanding or a link at your agency that you can get the data. That data is also publicly available. So, for example, I have all the AFCARS data from 1999 to 2013, which is the most current that's been released at this point. We're anticipating the 2014 data any day now. But I have all that data, so there's things that you could look at in that data if you wanted to look at your state, and in particular some of your counties, maybe not all of them. So let's take an example from what you've just heard about a theory of change. If your theory of change is that you're going to do something that might increase advocacy or questioning at the first couple hearings about child placement, do they need to be in care, can we return them home with a safety plan, if you're doing something that you're trying to reduce the time that the child's in foster care, that data is available from AFCARS. So I just took a look at the data from 2011 to 2013 because that's what I had on my desktop at the time, and I looked at how many kids were exiting foster care within a certain time frame. I looked at both kids exiting foster care within 1 month and kids exiting foster care in less than 12 months. And this is the data for 2011, 2012, and 2013. And your agency reports this, so they have this data available. And you could basically give them any time frame that you wanted. Let's say you want kids exiting care within 3 months or within 6 months, and you want to know those numbers. You can get the data from them and look and see if it changes over time. The picture that this paints, even though the numbers are very, very close to each other, is that the timeliness of permanency appears to be getting worse over time, and so 12.2% were out within a month in 2011, and that's dropped to 11.2% in 2013. The same thing is true with the kids exiting within 12 months, so the children exiting foster care within that specified amount of time. So this is just an alternative to think about. If you really want to know if there's timelier reunification or they're exiting care earlier, here's one source of data. Now, it's not going to answer all your questions, and it may not be the absolute best measure for what you want, but it's already available, and it gives you a place to start. I'll give you another example. I know at the workshop we had some people who were talking about wanting to focus solely on child representation, and they wanted better outcomes for their older youth. So you can really drill down into the AFCARS data to look at some of these different things. So what I did was I went in and looked at the youth who entered care late. So kids that entered care at 16 or older, what percentage of those exited to permanency? And you can see it's about half, and those numbers are also reducing over time. We have less kids that come into care at age 16 that are exiting to permanency over time. But that's one way to look at the data. If you want to know, you can take any age group that you're interested in and single out those kids and see not only are they exiting to permanency, but what permanency outcomes are they exiting to, or how long are they in care? You can look at any of those different things from AFCARS. So I just wanted to give this as a slight example. It's something that we can help you think through as part of the workshop, or even as follow-up. If you say, these are the data elements that we collect, what can I tell from these? Here's what I really want to know. We can start giving you some options. There's also, yes, they're making some notes in here about other places to look for the data. CASA might collect data. I've worked with jurisdictions where the GALs collect their own data, and they have exit surveys for the youth that have well-being indicators on them. The other organizations that you work with might collect data on this. The schools might have data that you want. It really depends on what you're looking for. These are just two examples of some of the data that might be already available, and it's important to think about what you might have and what you might have access to. And you have experts at CBCC who could talk through any of the AFCANS or even the NCANS data, which is not the court data, it's the agency data, before they come to court typically, but can help you think through what might be available there and then help you brainstorm ways to access this data in a timely fashion, since this data that's publicly available is slightly out of date. So I wanted to give you just an opportunity to think about some of the ways we might be able to look at this, and then think through, that's one of the ways that we help with follow-up from these workshops, helping you identify data and think about what you might have access to that you don't even know.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Summers. I appreciate that. And sorry for moving the screen around on you a bit. We were doing some back-end work, so hopefully that wasn't too distracting. So I noticed that Nancy has a question here, Dr. Summers. I'll read that aloud, and that'll transition us, I think, directly into the open space Q&A session. So we're right on time, which is great. Everybody knows I'm kind of a stickler for time. I'll just read Nancy's question. But to everyone, I'd invite you to ask any questions that you have after Dr. Summers addresses Nancy's question. And again, you can do that in one of two ways. You can either use the raised hand icon on the top of your screen. It's the little figure with his hand raised. And we'll see that you've raised your hand, and we'll just call on you over the phone. Or you can just type your question into the chat, and we'll read it out loud on the, from the chat box so that everyone can hear it, whether they're on the phone, whether they're in the Connect room or not. So Nancy asked, Alicia, using parent engagement as an example, people often do surveys of parents. Are there general rules about when IRB approval is needed to survey parents or youth?
Hey, Nancy, that's a great question. The typical rule of thumb that we go with is if you're using this information to improve a program or practice and not conduct the more rigorous research, then you don't need an IRB approval. So if it's for program evaluation purposes, it typically does not need an IRB approval. It does, however, we still think there are certain things or precautions that the states need to think about, because this is a vulnerable population. We're actually putting together a quick sheet on this that has some guidance, and that should be out actually this weekend. It'll be on CIP Share, but it talks about the different things to think through when you're working with the vulnerable population, like ensuring confidentiality, ensuring anonymity, making sure that they understand that this is not going to affect their case in any way. So we have some guidance about things for you to think about if you're going to survey this population, but the IRB is typically not necessary if it is just a program evaluation to improve something that you're doing. Other questions?
While people are thinking about any questions they might have, if you have other data sources that we have not listed on the list that we're generating now, it'd be a good opportunity for us to kind of crowdsource that information. So feel free to type that into the chat as well. If there's something on our list that you all are using in your state that is not listed, it'd be great actually to share that. This is not planned and was not planned in the call, by the way, but it's kind of working. So sort of just go with what's organically arising. If people can type that into the chat, that'd be really helpful. That way we can share as a CIP community with each other maybe some data resources that others are thinking of that we just hadn't thought of ourselves. So that'd be really great. It looks like there's several people responding to that request in the chat, so thanks for that. Excellent. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Catherine, Nancy, Nikki, and Vicki. Those are all really helpful. I can see that I'm really grateful that Scott's here with me. You can see him typing in the notes section and filling that in. That's great. Thanks. We'd also invite any questions that you have for the Center for Courts that are not necessarily CQI workshop related. If you just have something that you want to bounce off us or the broader community, you're welcome to do that as well. Again, just feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat, whichever you're most comfortable with.
Also, I wanted to mention, and we'll be talking about this before we wrap up, but just in case you think this is the end, our next workshop is going to be April 5th or 6th, or potentially 5th and 6th if we get enough interest. And it's still going to be one day. It's going to be held in D.C., and we're going to give you some information in a minute. If you're interested and think this would be valuable for your CIP, it's a link to the pre-work. And if you fill out the pre-work, we'll be in contact with you and make sure it's a good fit and get you signed up for the next workshop, also focusing on quality legal representation.
Great, thanks. And I realize that the list that we're generating here is not necessarily visible to everyone, so we'll scroll down so that everyone can see it before we move on.
So, Michelle, I think that there are lots of examples of this. It's just a matter of trying to figure out specific to a certain project. So Michelle's question is about an example where causal links were measured. So for a project to examine causal links, it has to be essentially a random control trial where you randomly assign someone to participate in either an intervention or a control group, which is typically business as usual. In order for that to happen, it takes a lot of resources. The site has to be on board and willing to give some people an intervention and others not an intervention, which I know some people have concerns about. And then you have to follow those cases and examine fidelity of the intervention. What happens, did they do this like they were supposed to, and then look at outcomes. And anytime you do those steps, you have a study that's examined the causal links. I'm going to give you a self-serving example. We did a project here at the National Council where we implemented a bench card at the initial hearing. We had a random selection of judges in 3 jurisdictions, and they were randomly assigned to either use the bench card or not use the bench card. We went in and looked at how their practice changed from before and after to see if they had fidelity to using the bench card. Were they actually asking the questions on there? And then we looked at outcomes related to that. And if you have the random assignment, you can just compare one group to another group and look at, and if the outcomes differ, then you can be fairly certain to some degree that they differ because of the intervention itself, because otherwise everything else should be random.
Great, thanks, Dr. Summers. It looks like there's another question here from Despina. In trying to plan what topics or projects would be helpful to our CIP, how will we know what topics will be addressed using this process, and generally when and where these groups will be held?
Okay, well, our plan is to try to have these workshops periodically throughout the year and in different areas. More than likely, though, the areas are going to be Denver, Reno, and D.C. because we have staff there, which means we can bring more states and have more people there to work hands-on with the states. So we will have them on kind of on each coast. Right now, our plan is going to be to have this one in April on quality legal representation. We'll be deciding on another topic based on what folks have identified to us as a need in the self-assessments, but also we use information from these calls, from the CIP meetings. Any information you give to us, we compile, and we say this is where they've identified the need the most people. And so we haven't picked our topic for the next one yet, but it'll be this fall. And it'll probably be out here in Reno or in Denver. In terms of how those get selected, we can definitely try to set up, once we go through the priorities that have been identified and the needs, we can definitely talk internally and see if we can get out a schedule of how we would like to do that. The problem is we'd like to be as responsive as possible, and sometimes planning a year in advance these are the ones we're going to do this year. With the priority shifting may not be as feasible, but we'll do our best to get you the information as soon as we have it available for the next couple of workshops.
Great, thanks, Dr. Summers. So we have just a few more minutes here. We'll take, say, one more minute of questions. Timer's set here. It looks like there's some slowdown in the chat, which is totally fine. One more comments coming in. Good question, April. I'll put the links up as soon as we move on to the last session here. It'll be at the very end. I'll drag them out right now. Hang on one second here. Should be able to do that easily. Actually, you know what I'll do is, it looks like the chat's slowing down. We'll just move on to the final layout here. And I'll put the files in. Give me 1 second to do that. All right, so we're just about at the end here, although we're not quite at the end. We have about 4 more minutes left on the call. We'd like you to do a couple things on your way out the door. First of all, there have been several requests throughout the call that we put the files back up, so they're on your lower left-hand corner. If you want to download them, just click on one of the files that you want to download, and then the Download Files button should illuminate. And then just click on that download file, and it'll drop it into your download folder on your desktop. And just go through each of them one at a time. I actually haven't tried to do all 3 at once, but I think you have to do them just one at a time. So there's the files. The second thing that I'd like to do is remind you of your homework. So I'll back up. I have the assignment here. Feels silly to call it homework, but there's the homework from last month's CIP all-call. So if you could, if you haven't done those 2 items and the optional third, please go ahead and do so between now and the next all-call in March. So that's my second ask. And then the third thing that I'll say, I have 4 things. The third thing that I'll say is just please respond to the poll on your way out the door, the one that says, so that was interesting. Based on what I know now, the CQI workshops, I'm going to. And then just choose the one thing that you think best represents sort of where you are with CQI Workshop. Again, this data is a way for us to test your interest in whether or not this model is a valuable model for you all as the CIP community. And then finally, on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you will see a link to the CQI Workshop pre-work. So if you're in regions 1 through 7, and stop me if I'm wrong here, Dr. Summers, if you're in regions 1 through 7 and you're interested in participating in the workshop, that's the pre-work that you would want to do prior to determining whether or not the workshop is a good fit. Is that fair, Dr. Summers?
Yes, that's if you're interested in signing up and coming to the next workshop, this is the first step in doing that. And then we'll make sure it's going to work well with your needs. But essentially, if you want to come, this is the place you need to start that process.
Excellent, thanks. See some questions coming in here on the chat. The date and time for the next call, actually I have to check my calendar. If one of the Center for Courts folks has that handy, if you could drop that into the chat. There you go. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. So, Bob, that gets to your question. Kelly, the web address for CIP Share. We're happy to share that. I'm sure that maybe Scott, there he is, drops that right into the chat. And then the last question is the link for the pre-work, which isn't working. Maybe cut and paste the link. I'll drop that into the chat box here as well. I'll give it a test here and see if it's, oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. Try that, Julie, try clicking on it through the chat. If not, you should be able to cut and paste it into your browser.
This is Julie. It's working now when you dropped it in to the...
Excellent. Yeah, the hyperlink in the notes pod must have just not worked, so thanks for saying that.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, so it's 1 o'clock, so that means we're at the end of our time together. Thanks so much for everyone joining us and being interactive and kind of flexing as we moved along today. Again, if you'll just do that homework, if you have any questions about the login for CIP Share, feel free to contact Scott or I, and we'll get you squared away. And that's it. So thanks again. I'll hang on the line for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, you're free to go. Thanks again. Bye.